Hello, everyone. I'm Stacy Dynamke with Nutrition Jobs, and I've got an amazing guest today who is going to talk to all of us in our Nutrition Jobs community all about actually how to get a dietitian job from a real live dietitian recruiter. So not just coming from me, who's been working in recruiting in the past, or from others who have some great ideas about it, but a real live recruiter, and that is Maddie VanCuren. Hi, Maddie. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. How are you? Thank you so much for having me on. I'm really excited.
I am delighted to have you. I thought what I could do is have you tell us a little bit about yourself. You are currently a dietitian recruiter for NutriCo, and you've been a dietitian recruiter for Dietitians on Demand. And that's a really unique job. So can you give us a
Mhm.
little background on how, maybe like how you got started? Because I will say it's obvious, but you're not one of these old seasoned dietitians like me. So I'm so curious how you got your start in dietetics, and then specifically how you got into dietitian recruiting.
Yeah, definitely. Well, to kind of start with my background, I think in schooling, I got my undergrad in nutrition, and then from there, I got my master's as well, and I was pursuing the RD. And through that time, I was in my young 20s, and I kind of knew I really loved like the marketing business side, but I didn't really know much about it. And by the time I was in my master's, I was about a year in, and I was just realizing like LinkedIn and just kind of the internet in general, there was so much more to the field of dietetics than I really realized. I'm also a fitness instructor, so pairing that with my schooling, I was just learning, wow, there's so much on kind of the recruiting, marketing, business side, and I always just really enjoyed that. So when I was in my internship, I was in a coordinated program. So first part of school, first year of my master's, I was just in school, and then the last 6 months, just my internship. And as I was in my internship, I honestly was just kind of addicted to LinkedIn, and I really started using it. And and there is an algorithm to it. So I was constantly looking up companies I thought were interesting. I really enjoyed All Access Dietetics. They were posting all these jobs, and I also signed up for your newsletter while I was in school. So I was seeing all these interesting things, and I was like, wow. So on LinkedIn, I honestly just started following all these companies. And so with the algorithm, more just kept popping up. And when my internship was coming to an end, like many of us, I was like, well, what am I going to do? And we were still in that era of COVID where there was a lot of remote options. And I didn't know what I didn't really understand like recruiting for it. And I just honestly was one of those days where I was just on LinkedIn for a long time, and I saw a posting that Dietitians on Demand posted about needing a recruiting coordinator. It was a remote position. I was like, this is interesting. And this is a tip I kind of want everyone to take away was when I clicked the job description, it was gone. Like it had like died, or what's it called? Like died or like went away.
Expired. Yeah.
Expired. Yeah. And so I was like, oh my gosh, that would be so cool. So I was like, you know what? I'm just going to email the company. So I just went to the company page, found an email, emailed them, and immediately put my resume in there, said, hey, I saw this. I'm not sure if it's expired. And then the next day I got an email back. So for anyone that sees something like that, I recommend always just trying to find an email for the company. Anyway,
That's
so then I
such
emailed
great
them.
advice. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so then long story short, I end up getting an interview, and then it took about a month through my interview process. And the next thing I know, I was hired, and I was a recruiting coordinator for Dietitians on Demand. So we specifically were recruiting dietitians for travel positions. And so I kind of just like in a way lucked into it, but also was really utilizing LinkedIn. So then I was in this position, and I was learning so much of the business marketing side, and I really, really enjoyed it. And I learned a lot about resume building and just different sides of dietetics. And I continued with that. And my position with them was a contract position because it was a new position for the company. So I knew eventually it was ending. And I wanted to kind of keep pursuing it. So again, with NutriCo, I actually reached out to them through just an email I found on their website. I again did the same thing. I sent my resume. I sent a few sentences saying, I am a dietitian. I work in this, just kind of saying what I could bring to the table. And then next thing I know, I was in touch with them, and then now I work for them.
You're such
So
a go-getter, Maddie. I love that. I'm hearing from you that It's okay to take the front seat instead of the back seat when you're job searching, and you can be very hungry and get out there without being obnoxious, without sort of being inappropriate or sort of bugging those that are in the position to hire, but really being a go-getter. I love that story about how you just stayed on LinkedIn and really capitalized on being able to reach out to those companies, because that's often what happens. I think oftentimes really juicy jobs that are in high demand, that are very interesting, that are non-traditional, that are remote, they're very, very competitive positions. And that job search for that job takes a lot of little bit of extras. It's not like delivering the brownies to the, to the front desk anymore. Like,
Yeah.
it's about getting in there and showing up, and really showing why you want this position and you're ready when the next opening comes up. So I love that story. So you're such a good go-getter, a great example for other dietitians. And also, sort of speaking of being a go-getter, you have in this position now as recruiter with NutriCo, you have launched a podcast, and I got to be on the podcast. So I was super,
Yeah.
super excited about that. How is that going for you?
It is going great. So I will say with NutriCo first, it was a surprise to work for them and I've enjoyed working for them so much. And we have a really great team. And my boss, specifically Katie, she definitely is into the marketing side and realizes too that dietitians as a group, they really value content that is getting put out there and they really value just learning about other dietitians in the field. I think there's so much out there we don't really know about. So it was kind of Katie's idea, and she said, "Hey, I think a podcast would be really great." And she knew I was kind of interested in that, and I said, "Yeah, let's do it." And we kind of did some market research and saw like there's not too many where we're interviewing other dietitians, where dietitians can kind of listen to how someone got into long-term care or how they got into recruiting or whatever it may be.
Or
So
consulting,
we were
right?
like, let's just kind of see if we could reach out to people. And then I started reaching out to people I knew in the industry and like you, and I've reached out to others and everyone was so happy to be a part of it. So excited. I think so. We launch an episode a week and we have it almost all the way out like past April. And we just
Oh,
launched.
fantastic.
Yeah. So it's going really great. And it's so interesting. Every episode I do, I learn something.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really awesome. And I think that was a great opportunity for me. And I've really enjoyed just communicating with other dietitians.
Yeah. Can you remind everybody, can you tell everybody what the name of the podcast is so they can subscribe?
Yeah, it's called Dietitian Talks.
Awesome. I've been listening to it since it started. You've got
Yeah.
great people on there. And I think you're right. Like, it's very interesting to understand and know what everyone is doing. Not everybody is doing clinical. Not everybody is doing private practice. Not everybody is a social media manager. Like, there are all these different jobs. The one I just listened to recently was somebody in the military, or somebody who was a data scientist. Like, there's just really, really interesting jobs out there that dietitians can learn about. It's, if you don't know, you don't know, right? So just showing all
Exactly.
these different opportunities. And I know NutriCo is a fantastic company, and have great positions in long-term care and consulting. So I know that we like to highlight them as well. They've been a great poster on nutrition jobs as well for their jobs. Let me go fast forward now, because I have a lot of dietitian questions about your day in the life of being a dietitian recruiter. I know recruiters are so busy. Like, it is such a busy, dense job. So can you give us a little overview of like a day in the life of what your position's like now?
Yeah, it's funny. Our team kind of just talked about this, and every day truly is different, which I really enjoy. But I would say to start out in the morning, I usually take about an hour of at least admin. So I check all of my emails kind of in the morning, I get like in the groove. I check all my emails, I kind of just see what's going on. And my day-to-day can be really different because the bulk of my job is I usually typically have about 20 to 30 jobs in a certain territory. So right now I handle New York and Maryland. So I go ahead and kind of look and check all my jobs. I see applicants. If I do have quite a few applicants, I'll go through resumes. I reach out. So a lot of it is kind of communication and then scheduling. So I'm scheduling interviews, and kind of seeing what I have on the agenda that day. So every day truly is different, which I really like. So just seeing, okay, what interviews do I have? And then just sometimes our corporate team will have meetings as well. Kind of a lot of organization is a really big thing, and then obviously sourcing. So, and as we
Yeah.
know, RDs are hard to come by in the first place, and then just kind of finding them in specific areas. So sometimes as a recruiter, we will have areas that are not as dense with dietitians. So figuring out, we really have to be creative too. How can we kind of find dietitians that might live in the area? And I think we'll probably talk about this, but we talked about it on my podcast, was a lot of dietitians don't really use LinkedIn or databases where we can find them. So being able to find them is tricky. So a lot of the day as well is sourcing. It kind of just depends. And then with me and our company, we do social media as well, which I really enjoy. Our team does a really good job on LinkedIn, Instagram, and then the podcast as well. So kind of every day is different, which I really enjoy. But and some days, I'll look up and the whole 9-hour day, I'm like, oh wow, it's already on and I have so much more to do.
I like how you said a 9-hour day. You guys, she's very busy. She does a lot.
Or
So
8 hours.
I think you mentioned some skills, some skill sets that you have, either that you've learned how to develop or that you were sort of born with. One is obviously organization. There's a lot that you're juggling. There's a lot of different arms to being a recruiter, sourcing, and then actually having conversations with dietitians. Any other type of skill or skill set that sort of surprised you about being successful in this position?
I think communication. I've always said, I think one of my strong suits with candidates is communication. I think being able to make them feel comfortable, with the company, know what they're signing up for, and being able to answer their questions. And I think just kind of being friendly has really helped. I think sometimes, unfortunately, people, go through a recruitment process or interview process and they don't feel very comfortable with the recruiter. And I think with Nutrico specifically, we really value like making our candidates feel comfortable, especially in dietetics, because sometimes like the job is hard and we want to know that you're valued by the company and that we're here to answer your questions. So I think having strong communication skills goes a long way.
Oh, I would say also one of your superpowers is that you're very relatable and approachable. I think that helps on, it can be sort of strategic in that you're getting a straight up answer from somebody, but you're also developing this relationship and assuming the person moves forward in the hiring process, that this can help with salary negotiation down the line. Like you're having this great relationship with the candidate and it makes them feel valued. And you're right, it's a very small community of dietitians. We may think that 100,000 sounds like a lot, but in the end, it's just the circle just gets tighter and tighter.
Mhm.
Despite the numbers, we start to know everybody. And so I think having this really great approach that you have, I think it's a really wonderful superpower for you personally, but I think also from a dietitian perspective, having going through the process with you I would imagine it would feel very welcoming, very inviting, and very authentic. So I think that's another skill you might have. Anything else that has surprised you about the job itself, or like what you're responsible for, or maybe about the candidates that come through, or any other sort of surprises about the position?
Yeah, I think one thing is probably resumes has surprised me a little bit. I think out of school, I really was very honed in on my resume, especially when I was looking for jobs. And then, immediately out the gate, my job for the past almost 2 years has been really just looking at resumes, combing through. And I think sometimes like the lack of information people put on there, and I'm like, you guys just, highlight yourself. It's so easy to highlight yourself in different ways. So I think that, and I think that's something as dietitians we lack a little bit because we are so specialized that we kind of forget to put a lot on there because we're like, well, if we put our RD on there, that's enough. But I like to see, different things on there, and like some specifics is like always put your CDR number, put your zip code, and put little things that I don't think we necessarily learn in school or right out of the gate.
That's really great advice. I think you and I are in this preaching choir about helping dietitians really shout out their value, really shout out who they are and how they can specifically succeed in an open position, in a position that they're looking at or they're trying to interview for. So that was my realization. I don't know how many years ago when I started doing resume reviews at Fancy for the Academy. You've heard this story so many times, but looking at resumes thinking, wait a minute, this doesn't seem to reflect who I know that you are and the amazing leader or the amazing worker or the amazing strategist or analyst, whatever this person was. The resume didn't, it was like a big disconnect between the two. So I like that. So CDR number, I have not heard that before. So you like to have that zip code for sure, but I didn't know that you'd like to have the CDR number.
Yeah, I personally like to have the CDR number because you can check it through the academy. So that's really important. Sorry, I live by a train and it's driving by. So CDR number, especially in my specific role, you know, we have to check that you are a licensed dietitian. So I think having that on there is great, specifically if you are applying for, you know, a dietetic position. And
Awesome.
then I also think zip code, you know, it's funny,
Yeah,
people used to put their exact address. You don't need to do that, but I think having zip code on there,
I
because
like
for
that.
specific positions, you might reach out to a recruiter and me, I can look and see, oh, we do have positions near this zip code. So
Yeah.
giving that does allow us to look a little bit more.
I like that. I think that's really helpful. And I'm imagining that you would want to see this CDR number maybe either up in the headline where the top where you can see the person's their contact information, but maybe more likely under a certification section, like and then include their licensure information or their certification info down there.
Exactly, yeah.
Is
So
that
if you
okay?
put registered dietitian below that, your CDR, and then, you know, maybe your schooling, so you can see all of that on there.
I
I
like that.
always think that's a great idea just to know, because I've received resumes in the past where um I can't tell necessarily if they actually are a dietitian, and some of them are.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you know, just put that wording and then put the CDR number, and also specifically in different job databases like Indeed, maybe ZipRecruiter. When we are looking for dietitians, those, you know, we'll type in those keywords. And if your resume is in the system, it will pop it up and bring it over to us. So that's also important to put those keywords that we would be searching.
Yeah, that's great. And I think you brought up another thing that I was going to make sure we either highlight, talk about, and that is the idea of keywords. I think keywords come up in a lot of different ways. And do you look specifically for keywords or are you searching for keywords? Like, for example, long-term care specialist or communication skills, or what types of keywords are you typically looking for?
Yeah, so specifically right now, it's typically registered dietitian. Those are the main words. So we know that you are specific to that. But I would say to if we're like reversing it, if I was looking for a position, I always say keywords of like, you know, health and wellness, nutrition. You can do registered dietitian, of course, but sometimes job postings aren't always going to have registered dietitian where it will pop out. They might do like, you know, wellness professional or corporate wellness. So I always say if you're on the job hunt, really look for those words specifically. And for example, for me as a recruiter in long-term care, if you were looking, you know, look long-term care, maybe care planning, maybe nursing home, specific words like that, because that will pop up because those are in our job descriptions.
Yeah, that's super, super helpful. Another question that came up is when people are using a applicant tracking system, whether it's NutriCode, Dietitians on Demand, or Compass or Airmark, that I think sometimes the idea is that you can submit your resume and the ATS or applicant tracking system is just going to uh, eat up your resume and the recruiter will never ever see your resume and it's going into a black hole. And I think people feel very scared about that. Your perspective, do you look at every resume that comes through for every position that is open?
So specifically, I do, yes. I honestly think from experience with Dietitians on Demand and Nutrico that we look at all resumes because dietitians, again, there's not a million of them. I think if you're maybe on a different side of recruiting in a different type of field, which is a lot broader, sure. But personally, you know, speaking from Nutrico, we look at every resume. Um, so I don't think that necessarily happens in this field. I think maybe in others it might a little bit, you know, I know people get intimidated by LinkedIn per se. You go to look at a job and it's like 700 people have applied. So possibly in those positions, but I would say from my experience, we do try our best and 99% of the time do look at every single resume.
Yeah, I think that goes back to our profession being not massive and speaking with some of the dietitian recruiters at some of the larger contract food service companies, they also say that they are required to look at every resume that comes through for each of their positions as
Yeah.
dietitians. So I think what that means then, if a dietitian feels like they're not getting a response from their resume, it sounds like maybe the resume could use a little zhishing to make sure that there's the appropriate keywords in there, that maybe they do say that they're a registered dietitian, really demonstrating their value and how they can be a great fit for the position. Because a lot of people are very qualified, it's just not showing up in the resume. So, sort of going back to that loop. Another question that came up was about LinkedIn. I think people are either already immersed into LinkedIn and are evangelists like you and I. And then there's another faction of dietitians who feel a little intimidated or don't feel like it's really necessary LinkedIn, or have thought about it but haven't really completed their LinkedIn profile. So the question is, are you sort of cross-referencing when you get down to the final candidates, the handful of candidates that you're going to look to hire? Are you looking at LinkedIn to help validate your decision or to learn more about that person? Or how do you use LinkedIn?
Yeah, so typically when someone applies, I will go and add them. Usually, if I'm really on top of it, I'll add them on LinkedIn, or a lot of the time they add me. So I would say don't be afraid to add someone on LinkedIn. I've had people apply to the job, add me on LinkedIn, and message me and say, "Hey, I applied." And I think that's great advice as well, because that shows me initiative and that shows me that they took the time to look me up. Because if you do, you see on there, I am a recruiter, you see everything. And I think people get scared. Oh, that's weird or that's too much. No, not at all. I think that just
That's your
is,
job,
yeah, I
right?
think that just shows initiative and that,
Yeah.
you're willing to look. And I think we kind of talked about this, but that intimidation factor, or I don't know, and that goes back to reaching out to companies. If you apply to a job and you don't hear back, people are really busy. And I will say sometimes emails get lost in translation or things don't pop up, spam. Like I would say reach out to companies.
Yeah.
Um, and utilize LinkedIn to message people, or even like for example with if someone had questions for you, I guarantee you would say, wow, that was so great that so and so messaged me to ask me a question. When that happens to me, I think it's so great. I've had dietitians that I know email me with interns and they're like, they just want to ask you questions. I'm like, go for it, so
Yeah, that is super helpful. I think that really relieves a lot of people because
Mhm.
it can seem intimidating, or the word recruiter seems like a very intimidating position. So that is super helpful. Okay, now fast forward. Let's say someone's got their resume that got noticed by you. You want to bring them in because they're a great fit for the location, for the position, and you want to interview them. I always like to know what your like go-to interview question is that you really learn a lot about the candidate. And what's your like favorite go-to or your first interview question that you like to ask as a recruiter?
Yeah. So one thing that we typically ask is, what is your favorite thing about being an RD? So we kind of like to get an idea, and specifically depending on the job. So for example, I work recruiting dietitians in long-term care. So it's important to us that you enjoy that part of the job. You want to work with, of course, the elderly population. You're there to help them, kind of have this passion for that. So we do look for that. And then another thing too is, I think, go into the interview and know what you want, like know what hours you want, know your availability. And I think don't be afraid to voice that. So we specifically at NutriCo always start with that and start out with, okay, like what are you looking for, part-time, full-time? What are you kind of looking for salary wise? And really, I think go in an interview knowing that, and don't be afraid to voice that to a recruiter, because honestly, it makes the recruiter's job easier when you are specific about it and you're like, yep, this is what I want and this is what I'm looking for. And I think it's more, I've noticed like newer grads or newer dietitians entering the field that are nervous about that, but I think that just shows confidence and that helps both parties.
The confidence and efficiency. But
Mhm.
I think also we all have to remember this is business. Like you're not paying somebody out of your pocket. Maddie specifically right out of her pocket to pay for somebody's position or
Yeah.
their bonus or whatever it might be. So
Mhm.
I think that's always an important thing to remember. And again, it's about building these relationships. And because you're so approachable, authentic, I think it also is very, very helpful. So one of the big questions that always gets asked is how about the salary composition or the negotiation process. People get anxious about that. They don't like to talk about money. They don't like to talk about compensation. What are some pieces of advice or tips that you can give a job candidate for when that time comes, for when salary negotiation comes up? I know that salary, sometimes there's a fixed amount, there's pay grades, there's certain levels, so that's not always negotiable. And I think a lot of us get sort of fired up about that. But from your perspective, how, whether it's Nutrico or just in general, what advice would you give dietitians for when they're doing the salary negotiation part of the job interview?
Yeah, I would say first, really read the job description. I think it surprises people sometimes. Some people don't really thoroughly read it. And I know now in most states, I think it's required that it's listed. So go ahead and look at that, write that down, whatever the salary range is, make sure you know that. And then going into the interview, if it's not on there, ask, okay, what's the salary range for this position? So make sure you know the salary range. And then if there's a specific number you want, if it's the minimum that you'll take, I would say, enter that conversation when they bring it up and say, this is the minimum I would take. I see this as the range. Like, what can you offer? And then say they do offer you something and you're like, well, my experience is 5 years of this. I would say if you're going to counter, email them back and say, hey, I have 5 years of experience as an RD, specifically in, for example, long-term care, acute care. I've used point click care, whatever EMR, maybe just a few points that really help kind of push you up if that is what you're looking for, and just kind of sell that. And I think there's also this idea that if you do that, you will lose the job. No, I don't, it's like you said, it's business. We as recruiters are never offended when they ask for more. I think just bring a few points to the table and kind of say why you're asking for more. And worst comes to worst, they say, hey, sorry, we spoke with our finance team and we can't increase that salary. So, and I think just from being in the recruiting world, I've learned that, it's okay. Don't be afraid of that. Cause I personally was first entering, the field, like just getting my first job. So I definitely understand that.
Yeah, yeah, that's super helpful. We know you're super busy, and I want to let you get back to hiring a bunch of dietitians. So two things. I want to ask you how people can connect with you to follow up with you. I'm imagining you're going to say your LinkedIn profile.
Yeah. Yeah. My
Okay,
LinkedIn profile is a really, really great place to start. I would
great.
say there mainly. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll link to that so you guys can all find Maddie and be able to connect with her there and stay connected with her and network with her because she's got some really great positions. And as you know, she's very approachable. Sort of parting gifts for us. Can you give us, like, if you could give a dietitian one piece of juicy advice about how they can be successful in a competitive job search environment, what would you recommend?
Yeah. I think the best piece of advice I could give that I've experienced is do not be afraid to connect with people or reach out to people. If you see an RD on LinkedIn, on Instagram, on any platform, and you're like, wow, I think I could find information from them or they could be helpful, seriously message them and just say, hey, kind of give your spiel. And I promise 9 out of 10 times, mostly 10 out of 10, they will love that and respond to you.
I like that. Thank
Do
you,
that.
Maddie.
Yeah, thank you so much.
You're so awesome. And I'm so appreciative of your time. And like I said, we all know that you are super busy. Very, very appreciative of your time and all your pearls of wisdom. I think that was very helpful. I learned a couple things. I'm sure everybody else did as well. So thank you from the Nutrition Jobs community. And we've also got a brand new website out there called dietitiansalaries.com, and you can participate in providing your anonymous salary information, and you will get a searchable report, I should say, of dietitian salaries. I'm trying to get the number up really, really, really high. It just started, so hopefully everyone can participate in that as well. All right, everybody. Thank you so much. Bye for now.